The rain had been falling steadily for hours, turning the windshield into a blurred mosaic of taillights and shadows. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, my eyes fixed on the familiar curve of Elmwood Road, the one I'd driven 1,000 times before. But tonight, as the wipers slapped back and forth, I noticed it, a faint glow in the rearview mirror that shouldn't have been there. Not from another car. It was steady, almost like eyes watching, unblinking in the downpour. My name is Sarah Klein, and for the past 8 years, I've lived in the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, just outside of Rochester, New York. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, but not much else about you. I work as a librarian at the local branch, a job that suits my love for the predictable rhythm of shelving books and recommending classics to the same faces day after day. My commute home is simple, a 15-minute drive down Elmwood Road, past the old mill that's been shuttered since the 90s, through a stretch of pine trees that whisper in the wind, and finally into my neighborhood of neat ranch-style houses with manicured lawns. It's a route I've memorized like the back of my hand, no detours, no surprises, or so I thought. That evening started like any other. I'd stayed late at the library, helping Mrs. Hargrove find a stack of cozy mysteries to tide her through the winter. By the time I locked up, the sky had turned that heavy gray that promises a storm. I slid into my old Honda Civic, the one with the faint smell of coffee from my travel mug, and pulled out onto the main drag. The radio hummed softly with some classic rock station, the kind that plays the same songs on repeat, lulling you into complacency. Traffic was light, as it always is after 7 in a town like this. Willow Creek isn't big enough for rush hour chaos. It's more the slow crawl of folks heading home to microwave dinners and evening news. As I turned onto Elmwood, the rain picked up, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. The road narrowed here, flanked by those dense pines that block out the moonlight on clear nights. I've always liked this part. It's peaceful, isolated in a way that feels safe rather than lonely. No streetlights. Just the occasional reflector post glowing orange in my headlights. I slowed down a bit, the tires hissing on the wet asphalt, and that's when I first felt it. A prickle at the back of my neck, like someone had just breathed too close. I glanced in the mirror out of habit. Nothing, just the empty road stretching behind me, swallowed by the darkness. Shaking it off, I focused ahead. The mill came into view on the left, its silhouette jagged against the storm clouds, windows like empty sockets. I remembered the stories from when I first moved here, how it used to churn out textiles back in the day, employing half the town. Now it's just a relic, fenced off with rusted chain link that sags in places. Kids dare each other to sneak in on Halloween, but I've never heard of anyone actually doing it. Not in Willow Creek, where trouble is more likely to be an overdue library book than anything sinister. The prickle returned as I passed the mill, stronger this time. I adjusted the rear view again, half expecting to see deer eyes reflecting back at me, but there was that glow, faint, yellowish, hovering just beyond the tree line. It wasn't moving with me, it lingered, as if anchored to the spot. My heart gave a little thud, but I told myself it was the rain playing tricks, refracting light from somewhere distant. Maybe a farm light piercing the woods. Elmwood Road borders a few old properties out that way, the kind with barns that haven't seen a tractor in decades. I pressed the gas a touch harder, eager for the straightaway where the pines thinned out. The radio crackled, the signal weakening, as it always did in this stretch, another familiar annoyance. I reached to fiddle with the dial, but my hand froze when I heard it, a soft rustle from the back seat, like fabric shifting or paper crumpling. I hadn't brought anything with me tonight, just my purse on the passenger floor. The car was empty. I'd cleaned it out that morning. Swallowing dryly, I kept my eyes forward, convincing myself it was the wind sneaking through a cracked window. But the windows were up tight against the rain. By the time I reached the edge of the pines, where the road widened into the suburban grid, the glow had faded from the mirror. Relief washed over me, mixed with a nagging irritation at my own jumpiness. It was just a long day, the storm messing with my head. I turned into my driveway, the automatic light flickering on to illuminate the modest two-story I'd bought 5 years ago. The house looked as it always did, porch light glowing warmly, mailbox stuffed with flyers from the neighborhood association. Inside, I kicked off my shoes, hung up my coat and poured a glass of chamomile tea, the routine as comforting as an old blanket. But as I sat at the kitchen table staring out at the rain-slicked street, I couldn't shake the unease. The route was the same, every curve and shadow etched into my memory. Yet tonight, something had shifted, like a familiar song played just a half beat off. I glanced toward the living room window, half expecting to see that yellowish glow flickering in the distance. The street was empty, of course. Still, I double-checked the locks before heading upstairs, the house settling around me with its usual creaks. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that makes you forget the storms of the night before. I drove to work the same way, eyes scanning the pines more closely this time. Nothing out of place, no glow, no rustle in the back seat. At the library, the day passed in a blur of patrons and returns, the incident fading like a half-remembered dream. But during my lunch break, as I sipped coffee in the break room, I found myself doodling on a napkin the curve of Elmwood Road, the mill's outline, and that persistent glow. Why did it feel like it was waiting for me? That evening, I took the route again, deliberately slowing as I passed the mill. The sun was setting early, painting the sky in bruised purples. Everything looked normal, the fence, the trees, the empty road. Until I glanced in the mirror one last time, there it was, just for a second, the glow, closer now, like it had edged forward in the daylight hours. My breath caught, and I accelerated, the pines blurring past. Home was just ahead, safety in its lighted windows. But as I pulled into the driveway, a new thought wormed its way in. What if the route hadn't changed? What if I'd been the one to notice it all along? The days blurred into one another after that second sighting, each commute a quiet test of my resolve. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the fading light, or perhaps the reflection of some forgotten signpost along the road. Willow Creek had its share of old quirks, the way the town well echoed strangely on windy nights, or how the corner store's neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat. But Elmwood Road, it was my constant, the thread tying my orderly life together. So I drove it again the next morning, windows down to let in the crisp air, radio tuned to the local NPR station, discussing nothing more urgent than leaf-peeping routes upstate. The pines stood sentinel as always, their needles rustling softly in the breeze. No glow, no unease, just the familiar hum of tires on pavement. At the library, the routine anchored me. I sorted returns in the back room, the scent of aged paper and polished wood, a balm against stray thoughts. Mrs. Hargrove stopped by again, her arms full of paperbacks she'd devoured overnight. "These kept me up past my bedtime, Sarah," she said with a wink, her voice carrying that Midwestern lilt that hadn't faded since she'd moved here from Ohio decades ago. We chatted about the plots, the twists that unraveled so neatly on the page. It was easy to lose myself in those stories, where mysteries had tidy resolutions and heroines emerged unscathed. But as I stamped her card, my mind wandered back to the road. What if my own story was starting to veer off script? Lunch was a sandwich from the deli across the street, eaten at my desk while I reviewed the interlibrary loan requests. The window overlooked Main Street, where pickup trucks idled at the light and kids on bikes darted between sidewalks. Normal, predictable. Yet when I returned the tray to the break room, I noticed something off. My travel mug, the one I'd left in the car that morning, sat on the counter. Steam rose faintly from its lid, as if I'd just poured it fresh. I hadn't. The realization hit like a cold draft. Had I forgotten? Or had someone? No. That was impossible. The library doors locked at night, and only the staff had keys. I unscrewed the lid, the coffee inside still warm, swirling with that exact shade of hazelnut creamer I favoured. A shiver traced my spine, but I dismissed it as absent-mindedness. Long days did that to you. The afternoon dragged, patrons trickling in for the after-school crowd. I recommended a psychological thriller to a high schooler, the kind with unreliable narrators and hidden motives, and watched her eyes light up. "Sounds perfect," she said, tucking it under her arm. If only my own puzzle had such clear clues. By closing time, the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I lingered a moment, keys in hand, debating whether to take a different way home, but there was no other way, not really. Elmwood was the straight shot, the efficient path through the woods to my quiet street. Detours would add 20 minutes, looping through back roads that felt even more isolated. So I climbed into the Civic, the engine turning over with its usual reliability. The drive started uneventfully. The sky had clouded over again, not rainy, but heavy, like the air before a front moves in. I kept the radio low, some folk tune about wandering souls that suddenly felt too on the nose. As the mill loomed into view, I slowed without meaning to, my gaze flicking to the fence. The chain link looked the same, sagging in the middle where ivy had crept through. But there, near the base, something caught my eye. A patch of trampled grass, fresh and uneven, as if someone had stood there recently, pressing close to the wire. I blinked, and in that instant, the pines seemed to close in tighter, their branches interlocking overhead like fingers. No glow this time, but the prickle returned, sharper, urging me to look away. I accelerated past, heart tapping an unsteady rhythm. The straightaway opened up and I exhaled, forcing my shoulders to relax. It was just erosion, or maybe a raccoon foraging. Willow Creek was full of wildlife. Deer crossing at dusk, foxes slipping through yards. Nothing to it. But then the radio cut out entirely, not with static but silence, as if someone had flipped the switch. I reached to turn it back on, but my fingers brushed the dial and paused. In the quiet, I heard it again, that rustle, faint from the back seat, like leaves shifting underfoot or cloth whispering against leather. I didn't turn around. Instead, I gripped the wheel, eyes locked on the road ahead, willing the neighborhood lights to appear sooner. They did, eventually, the grid of streets unfolding like a well-worn map. My house sat at the end of Maple Lane, its siding a soft beige that blended with the neighbors. I pulled in, cut the engine, and sat there for a long minute, listening. The car was still, the only sound the tick of cooling metal, no rustle, no glow in the mirror. I grabbed my purse and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my flats. The porch light was on a timer, glowing steadily, but as I fumbled for my keys, I glanced back at the car. The back window reflected the street lamp, but for a split second, I swore I saw a shadow shift inside. Subtle, like a curtain fluttering in a breeze that wasn't there. Inside, the house enveloped me in its familiarity. The faint scent of lavender from the diffuser, the stack of unread mail on the hall table. I locked the door, double-checked the deadbolt, and moved through the rooms turning on lamps. The kitchen light buzzed softly as I heated leftovers. Chicken noodle soup from the night before. Eating alone at the table, I stared at the window, the curtains drawn against the encroaching dusk. The neighborhood was settling in, a dog barking 2 houses down, the distant hum of a garage door closing. But my mind replayed the drive, piecing together fragments. The trampled grass, the warm coffee, the silence that wasn't empty. Upstairs in the bathroom, I ran the faucet hot, steam fogging the mirror. As I washed my face, a thought surfaced, unbidden. What if the glow wasn't new? What if I'd seen it before, dismissed it as part of the landscape, like the mill's shadow or the pine's sway? I wiped the glass clear, meeting my own eyes, tired but sharper now, searching for cracks in the reflection. Sleep came fitfully that night, the house creaking under the weight of unseen winds. And in the dark, I wondered if the route was pulling me toward something, or if I was the one steering blindly into it. The following day, I arrived at work early, the library quiet before opening. I busied myself with the returns cart, but during a lull, I found myself at the computer, typing Elmwood Road history into the search bar. Old articles popped up, the mill's closure in '92, job losses that hollowed out the town for years. Nothing about lights or shadows. Frustrated, I closed the tab, but the seed was planted. That evening, as I approached the turn onto Elmwood, I promised myself I'd pay closer attention. The sun dipped low, gilding the trees in amber. The mill passed in a blur, but this time I caught it. A figure? No, just the fence post leaning at an odd angle. Or was it? The rustle came sooner than expected, midway through the pines. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on dry leaves. Heart pounding, I twisted in my seat. The back was empty, of course, seatbelts dangling, floor mat undisturbed. But on the passenger seat next to my purse lay a single pine needle, fresh and green, as if plucked moments ago. I hadn't opened the windows, hadn't stopped. Staring at it, the world outside seemed to hold its breath, the road stretching empty in both directions. I picked up the pine needle between my thumb and forefinger, its sharp tip pricking my skin just enough to ground me in the moment. It was real, undeniably so, damp from the evening air, a tiny invader in my sealed world. I dropped it onto the dashboard like it burned, then shifted back into drive, the engine's rumble breaking the silence. The road ahead curved gently, leading me out of the pines and into the familiar sprawl of Willow Creek. But as the first streetlights appeared, dotting the horizon like hesitant fireflies, I couldn't shake the image of that needle. Where had it come from? The car was spotless. I vacuumed it every weekend, a ritual to keep chaos at bay. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the neighborhood had that hushed quality of early evening, porch lights flickering on, families visible through half-drawn blinds, sharing dinners or scrolling through devices. My house stood quiet, its windows dark rectangles against the fading sky. I sat in the car a beat longer, scanning the street. A neighbor's minivan idled across the way, backing out slowly, but otherwise it was still, no shadows shifting, no unexplained glows. Finally, I stepped out, locking the doors with a beep that echoed too loudly in the cooling air. Inside, the routine took over like muscle memory. Keys on the hook by the door, coat draped over the chair, a quick rinse of my hands at the sink. The kitchen felt smaller tonight, the counters cluttered with the remnants of my life. Unopened mail, a half-empty fruit bowl. The calendar marked with library shifts and nothing else. I microwaved a frozen meal, the timer beeping insistently, and ate standing up, fork scraping against the plastic tray. My eyes kept drifting to the window over the sink, where the backyard fence separated my yard from the next. Beyond it, the pines started again, a dark wall that backed half the suburb. Were they watching? The thought was ridiculous, born of fatigue, but it lingered like smoke. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed in the queen bed upstairs, the sheets twisting around my legs, while the house whispered its secrets, the furnace humming to life, floorboards settling with faint groans. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and padded downstairs in my robe, the wooden steps cool underfoot. A glass of water from the tap. Then I lingered in the living room, staring at the bookshelf I'd assembled myself shortly after moving in. Classics, mostly. Hemingway, Austen, a few well-worn thrillers from my college days. I pulled one down at random, a story about a woman unraveling in her own home, but the words blurred on the page. Instead, my mind replayed the drive, the needle, the rustle, the glow that now felt like a memory etched in amber. The next morning broke with a reluctance that mirrored my own. Grey light filtered through the curtains, the kind that makes autumn feel endless. I dressed quickly, jeans, a sweater, sensible shoes, and headed to the library early, hoping the bustle would clear my head. Willow Creek's main street was waking up, the bakery's warm scent wafting out, a few locals nodding as they carried coffee cups to their trucks. At work, I dove into tasks with forced efficiency, reshelving books in the fiction aisle, their spines a colourful barrier against stray thoughts. But during the mid-morning quiet, when the only sounds were the hum of the heater and the occasional page turn from a patron, I found myself at the reference desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard again. This time, I searched broader. Unexplained Lights, Elmwood Road. The results were sparse, mostly forum posts from hikers complaining about distant farm beacons or old ghost stories tied to the mill. One thread caught my eye from a local history group, mentions of watcher lights in the 70s, vague accounts of travellers spotting odd glows near the pines, dismissed as swamp gas or headlights from forgotten service roads. I scrolled deeper, heart quickening at a single comment. Saw it last week, followed me halfway home, felt like it knew where I was going. The poster was anonymous, dated 3 months ago. I closed the laptop, pulse thudding in my ears. Coincidence. Had to be. The day wore on, patrons filtering in with their requests. Mr. Ellis, the retired teacher from down the block, asked for books on local law, his glasses perched on his nose as he leaned in. "Anything on that old mill? Grandkids are into ghost hunting." I smiled tightly, recommending a dry history tome, but inside questions bubbled. Did he know something? Willow Creek thrived on half-shared stories, the kind passed over fences or at the diner counter, but asking felt like admitting weakness, like cracking open a door I wasn't ready to step through. By closing, the sky had deepened to a bruised indigo, street lamps buzzing to life. I locked up, the library's front door clicking shut behind me, and slid into the Civic. The pine needle was still on the dash, a silent accusation. I flicked it out the cracked window before starting the engine, watching it tumble into the parking lot gravel. Elmwood Road waited, its pull magnetic. As I turned onto it, the pines rose like sentinels, their branches laced with twilight. I drove slower than usual, windows up, radio off. The silence amplified everything. The crunch of leaves under tires, the faint scent of damp earth seeping in. The mill appeared on schedule, its fence a rusted guardian. I scanned the base, half expecting the trampled grass to have spread, but it looked unchanged, swallowed by shadows. No figure, no lean in the posts. Relief flickered, tentative. Then, midway through the straightaway, the prickle hit again, crawling up my arms. I glanced in the rear view out of habit. There, the glow, yellowish and steady, not behind me, but off to the side, weaving through the trees like a lantern carried on foot. It paced me, dipping in and out of view, never quite catching up but never falling behind. My breath shallowed, hands slick on the wheel. I accelerated, the speedometer climbing to 50, then 60, faster than safe on this curve. The glow kept pace, flickering brighter for a moment, as if amused. Was it a person? A vehicle hidden in the underbrush? The pines blurred, a green haze, and I strained to listen over the engine's roar. No rustle this time, but something else, a low hum, like distant machinery vibrating through the floorboards. The neighborhood lights broke the tension finally, spilling golden across the road. I braked hard at the stop sign, chest heaving, and checked the mirror. The glow was gone, vanished into the woods as if it had never been. Pulling into the driveway, I killed the engine and gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached. The house loomed welcoming, but stepping inside felt like crossing a threshold into fragility. I moved room to room, flipping switches, the lamps casting pools of light that pushed back the dark. In the kitchen, I poured tea with shaking hands, the steam curling like unanswered questions. Sitting at the table, I traced patterns on the wood grain, mind racing. The root was fracturing, piece by piece. Needles, coffee, grass. Now this pursuit. Isolation crept in, not from the empty house, but from the growing certainty that no one else would believe it. Who could I tell? The librarian seeing shadows. They'd smile politely, suggest more sleep. Upstairs, I drew the bedroom curtains tight, the fabric heavy against my fingers. Lying in bed, the ceiling stared back, cracked in places like veins. The hum echoed faintly in my memory, or was it real, seeping through the walls? I closed my eyes, willing sleep, but dreams came fragmented. Endless drives down Elmwood, the glow blooming into eyes that knew my every turn. Morning would come, the routine would resume. But deep down, I knew the change was settling in, rewriting the map I'd trusted for years. And tomorrow, when I took the road again, it wouldn't be the same, not for me. The weekend arrived like a reluctant truce, the kind Willow Creek offered in late fall when the leaves carpeted everything in muted reds and golds. I spent Saturday morning at the farmer's market on the edge of town, the air crisp with the scent of apple cider and fresh-baked pies from the stands. Vendors called out greetings, their faces familiar from years of nods and small talk, Mrs. Delaney with her jars of honey, the retired couple selling handmade quilts. I bought a pumpkin for the porch, more out of habit than holiday spirit, its weight solid in my arms as I carried it back to the car. The normalcy of it all should have soothed me, but as I loaded the trunk, my eyes drifted to the road ahead. Elmwood's turn-off visible in the distance, a silent invitation I wasn't ready to accept. Instead, I drove the long way home, looping through the back streets lined with colonials and split levels where kids raked leaves into piles that crackled underfoot. The detour added time, but it gave me space to think, or try not to. The glow, the needle, the hum, they circled my thoughts like persistent fog, thickening with each replay. By afternoon, I was in the garage, sorting through boxes I'd shoved into the corner years ago. Old photo albums from Rochester, faded maps of the area, a stack of library discards on local history. Dust motes danced in the slanted light from the small window, and as I flipped through yellowed pages, one caught me, a pamphlet on the mill, dated 1985. It described the site's expansion, how tunnels once connected the factory to nearby properties for easy transport. Tunnels. The word hung there, evoking images of forgotten passages snaking under the pines, unseen and unmapped. I set it aside, unwilling to dwell, and spent the evening on the couch with a blanket and tea, the TV murmuring a documentary on upstate folklore, stories of will-o'-the-wisps, lights that lured travelers off course, harmless echoes of methane gas, the narrator assured. But the parallels gnawed at me, and when the screen flickered to static for a split second, I muted it entirely. The house felt heavier then, its walls pressing in with the weight of silence. I checked the doors again, a new ritual, and retired early. The bed, a temporary refuge. Sunday dawned brighter, the sun cutting through the blinds in sharp lines. I decided on a walk before work. No, not work. The library was closed, but the pull of routine drew me toward town anyway. I laced up my sneakers and headed down Maple Lane, the pavement cool underfoot, past houses where families prepared for the week. A father washing his SUV, the spray misting the air, a woman clipping hedges with steady snips. The neighborhood trail led to the wood's edge, not deep into the pines but skirting them, a gravel path worn smooth by joggers and dog walkers. I kept to the open side, the suburb's safety net, but the trees loomed close, their branches whispering secrets in the breeze. Halfway along, I paused at a bench overlooking a small creek, the water murmuring over stones. It was peaceful here, a spot I'd overlooked in my car-bound life. But as I sat, tracing patterns in the dirt with my toe, a sound filtered through, faint at first like the rustle from the car, but layered now, almost rhythmic. I turned toward the pines, eyes straining. There, between the trunks, a flicker. Yellowish, brief, like sunlight on glass. It vanished before I could focus, leaving only the sway of branches. My pulse quickened, but I stayed put, watching. Minutes passed, the trail empty behind me. No one else saw it, or if they did, they didn't stop. The walk back felt longer, the suburbs' cheer now a thin veil over something sharper. I showered and changed, deciding to run errands. Groceries from the IGA, a stop at the post office for stamps, anywhere to fill the hours without facing Elmwood. But as I merged onto the main road, the GPS on my phone chimed unprompted, rerouting me, straight down the forbidden stretch. I overrode it, taking the bypass, but the detour wound through unfamiliar farmland, silos standing like silent watchers against the horizon. By the time I returned home, bags unpacked and counters wiped, the avoidance had worn thin. The route was calling, not with words, but with that insistent pull, the one that made every other path feel wrong. Monday morning, the library buzzed with the week's start. Returns piling up, a school group scheduled for story hour. I threw myself into it, reading aloud from a picture book about adventurous rabbits, their voices high and eager. The kids laughed at the twists, oblivious to the shadows in my own tale. Lunch came, and I ate in the break room alone, the travel mug untouched on the shelf. No mysterious refills today, but as the afternoon faded, closing time approached like a deadline. The parking lot emptied, colleagues waving goodbyes, their taillights fading towards safer roads. I lingered, straightening shelves, delaying the inevitable. Finally, keys in hand, I stepped out into the twilight, the air cooling fast. The Civic waited, innocent under the lot's single lamp. I slid in, the door locking with a solid thunk, and started the engine. No radio, no windows down, just the road. Elmwood unfolded as always, the mill's silhouette greeting me like an old acquaintance. I drove past without slowing, eyes forward, but the prickles started early, blooming into full unease by the pines. The glow appeared sooner this time, not in the mirror but ahead, hovering at the curve like a beacon turned inward. I didn't accelerate, instead I pulled over at the shoulder, gravel crunching, the engine idling low. The pines pressed close, their scent earthy and close. Stepping out felt reckless, but the pull was stronger now, demanding confrontation. The air was still, save for the faint hum. Machinery? Wind? I walked toward the tree line, flashlight from my phone cutting a narrow beam, leaves crunched underfoot, the ground soft with decay. Deeper in, the light caught something. Not a figure, but an old trail, overgrown and faint, leading toward the mill. The glow pulsed there at its end, soft and inviting like a door left ajar. I stopped, beam trembling. Footprints, fresh, boot-sized, marred the path, leading in and out as if someone had stood watch, then retreated. Not mine. The realization settled cold and clear. This wasn't random. The rustles, the needle, the coffee, they were traces, deliberate echoes of intrusion. Someone or something knew my route, my habits, mirroring them back in fragments. Not to harm, but to unsettle. To rewrite the familiar until doubt consumed it. The glow brightened, almost beckoning, and in that moment I understood. The change wasn't in the road, it was in me. The observer turned, observed. The routine, a stage where I danced alone. I backed away, heart steady now in its terror, and returned to the car. The drive home blurred, the neighborhood lights a hollow welcome. Inside, I sat in the dark. The house's creaks a chorus of questions unanswered. Tomorrow, I'd take the route again, had to, for the life I'd built, but the glow would wait, patient in the pines, knowing I'd return. And when I did, the line between watcher and watched would blur forever, leaving only the endless drive.